Oh, oh, good morning. Wow, that's rough without that hour of sleep. Here in the U.S., we turned our clocks forward. But we're here ready for you. Another edition of Shree's Sunday New York Times Read Along. My name is Neil Parekh, and I am the executive producer and occasional guest host. Our guest today is Ralph Blumenthal, a New York Times reporter from 1964 to 2009, 45 years. He's also the author of The Believer, Alien Encounters, Hard Science, and The Passion of John Mack. That's only one of the many books he's written. Our host, of course, is Sri Srinivasan, Marshall Loeb Professor at the Stony Brook School of Journalism and co-founder of Digimentors. We have a great show planned for today. Among other things, we'll be taking a look at a lead story on the front page of the paper, an incredible investigative piece on nursing homes and how they've manipulated the rating system. We'll take a look at special packages devoted to COVID in the arts and leisure section, Sunday Review, and the at-home section. We'll also, hopefully we'll have time to take a look at a great piece on from Times Insider, which is on page A2, a reflection on the New York Times newsroom and what it's like empty, what it's like for reporters who are missing. As you know, it's been about a year since at least the U.S. Went on lockdown. Everyone's reflecting this week. I myself remember how we went into the weekend thinking it's going to be one day, maybe 2 weeks. Initially it was going to be one day for schools to close so they can figure out how to do distance learning. And the next day it was it was closed for a few weeks, closed to the end of the month. And here we are a year later. So let's see who's joining us this morning. First up, hi, Mom. How are you doing? My mom, Sudha Parekh, joining from Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. My mom has her vaccines. I have my first shot. We're looking forward to seeing you soon, Mom. Jonathan Borstein, greetings from the East Village. Rajni joining us from Toronto. And our producer, Steve Taylor, watching from Philadelphia. He'll be hosting you on LinkedIn and sharing links, etc. Doug Levy, an early riser and another, that extra hour probably hurts even more when it's 5:30 your time, Doug, but thank you very much. A truly international show. We've had Toronto so far. Anis is joining us from Kerala, India. Thank you so much. Leah from the Upper West Side. Naomi joining us from the Upper West Side as well. Thank you for the shirt comment, Naomi. This is a pink shirt. I'll take a executive producer privilege to let you know I bought this shirt, or I got this shirt specifically for my 7-year-old daughter. It wasn't my style. I'm more of a blue, gray, very boring colors, but I wanted to wear a pink shirt so that she saw me wearing a pink shirt and that she knew that was okay. Thank you, Naomi. And Diane is joining us from Margate, New Jersey, South Jersey. So please, if you're watching, please tag your friends. Please share this. Please retweet. For everyone watching on Ralph's pages, Ralph's Facebook page and Twitter account, thank you for joining us. We are live every week with the New York Times Read Along with a special guest. And again, this week it's Ralph Blumenthal. So without further ado, I'm going to have Sri Srinivasan join us on the screen. Sri, good morning. How are you?
I'm great. I hate the change of time twice a year. I'm hoping that this is something that will be eliminated in our lifetime, but who knows? Thank you, as always, Neil, for putting together such a fabulous show. We have a great speaker and guest with us, and we'll be looking at the New York Times. We'll be talking about the news, and we'll be taking your comments and questions. We'd love to hear from everybody. Tell us how this year has been. Tell us where you're watching from. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Please share this with your friends. If they can't watch now, they can watch later. You can tag a friend and they can join us when they have a moment. The entire show will replay right after. Let's thank our amazing team. Neil is just part of the team that puts this together. You can see Paula Kiger at Big Green Pen joining us from Tallahassee. Steve Taylor at Steve DeReeve joining us from Philadelphia. Carla Baranauckas at Kabara joining us from New Jersey. And Julia Weeks at Julia L. Weeks from Brooklyn. And Neil is outside Washington, D.C. He's at Neil Parekh, executive producer and VP of communications and events at Digimentors. Our team does this show, but also puts together shows for all kinds of companies, large and small, around the world. Maybe you'd like your own talk show like this, or you have a conference or a summit or a webinar or training. We do it all, and we'd love to talk to you about that. Our website is digimentors.group, or just email Neil or me, Sri@digimentors.group and Neil@digimentors.group. We'd love to talk to you about this. And we also want to thank our sponsor, MuckRack. MuckRack is an amazing organization. We worked with them for many years. They help journalists and PR folks connect with each other and make sure that accurate, useful information is shared online. Very grateful to our friends Mike Schneider and Greg Gallant and Lee Semmel at MuckRack.
Absolutely, Shri. And I want to just acknowledge a few more people who have joined the show. Again, our international audience. Gunther is watching from Vienna, Austria. Ted is watching from Washington, D.C., not far from where I am. Linda Lawrence, Long Island. Philip Hall from London. Ashok from Mumbai. And Pradnya is watching from Silver Spring. So it's good to know that the time change didn't affect too many of our international viewers. It's an hour earlier, of course, in many parts of the world. As a reminder, our guest today is Ralph Blumenthal. You can follow him on Twitter at Ralph Blue, Ralph BLU. He was a New York Times reporter from 1964 to 2009 and is the author of The Believer, Alien Encounters, Hard Science, and The Passion of John Mack. That's his latest book. It's coming out tomorrow, in fact. But we are also thankful that we are live on Ralph's Facebook page and his Twitter account. So if you're joining us from there, hello and welcome. Sri, we'd love for you to take us through the New York Times and let us know what's on the front page.
Sure.
And various other sections as well.
And welcome, everybody. We will meet Ralph in just a moment. We're just going to glance at the front page here. The stories, look at this image here. A decade ago, a tsunami destroyed the ancient Japanese village of Kessen. The survivors now realize the void will last forever. And just a really powerful photograph there. The lead is stimulus signals shifting politics of poverty fight to lift ratings, nursing homes shroud neglect. France's emboldened far right attracts voters it's once horrified. Sounds like something in the US. And investor craze turns sneakers and pixels to gold. Story here. And then enjoying the mild weather in Miami Beach, where banners read, vacation responsibly. No state has been hit worse than New York. The two states that have been hit worse are New York and Florida. And there's still so many problems there, but people are going there. And then focusing on the bright side in the Sunshine State, defying the virus, Florida has boomtown feel for better or worse. And her hero to pariah, the imperiousness isolates Cuomo. And so lots on the front page to talk about. We will revisit that front page with our friend Ralph Blumenthal. This is the music issue of the New York Times Magazine. And on the cover featuring Moses Sumney. The Sunday Review cover is The Week Our Reality Broke, looking at a year of the pandemic. What really happened at Reply All? This is a popular podcast, and they had a lot of issues around how they treated their workers. And a podcast was applauded for its reporting on embedded racism in the workplace. It didn't make it to the third episode. So we'll talk about that. The book review cover is How Beautiful We Were by Inbolo Mbue and reviewed by Omar El Akkad. The Metropolitan cover is a closed case, but still no answers. The death of a Cornell fraternity recruit after a 2019 party remains a dark mystery. Real estate cover is finding refuge in dirty hands and comfort TV. This is about a long-running British show, BBC show called Gardener's World, which is popular during the pandemic. And the arts and leisure cover is, can you believe we've been doing this for a year? So talking about various aspects of the arts and leisure world in the pandemic. And tonight is the Grammys. As some of you will know, the Sunday business cover is Your Taxes 2021, and different things that you should know about your taxes as 1 month goes on, 1 month till the tax deadline in the US. And we're counting the days. We know that President Biden said that everyone will be eligible starting on May 1st for the vaccine, and July 4th, we could perhaps all be together. So there's a quick tour of the various section fronts. And now I'd like to say hello to our guest. Let's remind everyone that our guest today is Ralph Blumenthal. He is a former New York Times reporter who was there for 45 years. And he's the author of the brand new book, The Believer, Alien Encounters, Hard Science, and the Passion of John Mack. And we are very grateful to Ralph for being with us here today. So let's say hello to Ralph.
Good morning, Sri and Neil. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Delighted to have you. Ralph, our first question always is, how are you? Where are you? And how's your family handle the pandemic?
Well, we're fine, thank you. We're on the east side of Manhattan, overlooking the East River and FDR Park. My wife and I have gotten our second shots, so we're okay. 2 girls are okay, so we have a lot to be thankful for. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. And we should first ask you for your reaction to seeing the newspaper laid out like that. If a dozen years ago we had said they would, the paper would be like this, what would your thoughts have been about that?
When I started at the New York Times in 1964, it was a 2-section paper, the main news section, and then the second front, which started off with a feature story and the jumps. We could not imagine, the direction the paper took, all the special sections that Abe Rosenthal and Punch Sulzberger started. I should reverse that, Punch Sulzberger and Abe Rosenthal, because Punch was the publisher, but they really saved the paper with the weekly sections, sports and living and home. And now, of course, we have the equivalent of, the cable scene with a multitude of sections in color. There used to be a slogan at the New York Times. The advertising slogan was, you don't have to read it all, but it's nice to know it's all there. So anyone who comes to the paper now says, oh my God, I can never get through this paper. But you don't have to. You just pick and choose.
Yeah, and I think that's a good slogan. They should still have that. Folks, if you're just tuning in, this is Ralph Blumenthal, who spent 45 years at the New York Times. He still writes there occasionally and is the author of a brand new book, which we'll talk about. It releases tomorrow. Ralph and I went to Columbia Journalism School a few years apart, and it was great to get to know him over the years, and he's had an amazing career. Ralph, tell us about some of the incredible stories you got to cover during your time.
Well, one of my first projects at the Times really was investigating Nazi war criminals who were hiding and who had escaped justice and turned up in America. They were welcomed into the country as anti-communists after the war. Some were scientists who had sort of a nefarious knowledge of science in Nazi Germany. And I'm proud to say I broke that story, and they're still deporting. They deported the last Nazi concentration camp guard just a few weeks ago. So that story, it's dying out now, literally, but it was a big story for many years in the 70s.
Can we just pause there? The show on Amazon called The Hunters is about Nazi hunters set in the U.S. in the 70s, and they talk extensively about Operation Paperclip,
right,
as it was known. about these Nazis, mainly scientists, who were brought to the United States with the full blessing of important parts of the government because they're worried that these scientists would fall into the hands of the Russians, right?
True, true. That was the official justification, and there was some truth to that. But sadly, elements of our government would seem more sympathetic to the scientists than the victims. So that was one story. And I also did a lot of coverage of the mafia, and it led to my first book on the pizza connection FBI drug case. So those were two of the stories that stick out in my mind. There's a picture of me with the transcripts and the pizza connection. That trial, longest federal trial in history up to that point, maybe till today, lasted 17 months and produced 49,000 pages of trial transcript. And there I am with some of them.
What was in a nutshell, that story?
Well, there was a secret arm of the Sicilian mafia, not a physical arm, but a element of the Sicilian mafia operating secretly in America, which didn't emerge until that case. And they were laundering money and dealing drugs out of pizza parlors, which were a great front because nobody cares, pays much attention to people going in and out of pizza parlors with boxes. In this case, the boxes contained cash and heroin. So that was quite a case, and it started off with the murder of Carmine Gallante in Brooklyn, and that was sort of a window into this case, and it occupied me for many years, that trial and the book that came out of it.
All right, let's get some more highlights. Well,
I noticed today on the in the style section is a story on the 21 Club. And I read that with particular interest. As I said, I like to dip into the paper and pick out things that interest me. And I skip over some of the things that don't interest me that much, but there's plenty to read. And that story stuck with me because I wrote a book on the Stork Club, the famous nightclub from the speakeasy days through the 60s, which was the place in New York. Pardon me for mentioning that over the 21 Club, but Stork Club was even more venerable, I think, and all the celebrities went there. So, and that closed in '65 because New York changed and the whole nightclub scene was different. Today it was obviously completely wiped out, but the 21 Club was part of that genre of elite places where celebrities came and mingled. And you had to be seen if you were anyone. So now it looks like they're going to close for good.
All right. Go ahead and you can give us a couple more of your stories.
Well, actually, when we segue to The Believer, I'll tell you that began when I was the Southwest correspondent in Texas. My last big assignment for the Times was to be a national correspondent in the Southwest, and it was based in Houston. So I worked there, and I came across a book by John Mack, and we can talk about that. But that was really a highlight of my career, being a national correspondent, because I got to cover Katrina, which broke in 2005, shortly after I got there. And Texas was a marvelous opportunity, is and was for any journalist. I always say it's paradise for journalists because so much happens in Texas. It's such an incubator of strange things and politics and culture. It's a wonderful state. I mean, so rich in history. Obviously, it was a republic, one of the few places in America that was a country before the United States. But there was so much to do there and such interesting people. We got such a great welcome in Texas. So I love that. And before that, I was an arts writer. I had asked for a change of pace after covering the mafia and Nazi war criminals, which were kind of heavy duty. And I asked for something else, and I was happy to get assigned to the culture beat as a news reporter. And loved going to the opera and, writing up for the Broadway scene when there was a Broadway scene. So that was a nice change. What I like to say is the Times is such a wonderful institution because there's so many places to work at the Times, so many different beats. And I've done, I was fortunate enough to do so many of them. And, I look back on the stories I did, and I'm proud of them. Some I'm less proud of because they didn't work out as well as they should have, but that was part of the game. But it was just a terrific place to work and remains so. And the changes, we can talk about that on the paper that I've seen in my career and after. Now I'm a kind of a contributor, freelance contributor to the paper whenever I have a story I like to do. But it's a tremendous transformation of the paper.
Thank you. Let's take a look at some of the comments coming in. Ron Thomas's greetings from Dubai. He's a former guest on the show. He always watches, so thank you for being here. Laura Silverman says, a 2-section New York Times, hard to imagine. She's a former guest watching from Philadelphia. And lots of other comments coming in here as well. We have a question from Philip Hall, who says, any comments on Demyanuk? I guess that was the guard who was sent back. Is that?
Yeah. John Demyanuk. That's an interesting case because he was identified as a guard, a concentration camp guard, and there was some problems with the case, and it was used by Holocaust deniers to cast doubt on the quality of evidence. In the end, he was found guilty and deported, as I recall. It was a long, drawn-out case, but and it shows the difficulty, by the way, of establishing justice so many years later. People's memories fade and witnesses die. So it was kind of a paradigm case, but very tangled. But in the end, I think justice was done, and he was held accountable for his deeds.
Thank you. Here's Paula Kiger, who's putting in all these great links, including to the show The Hunters on Amazon Prime, which is about Nazi hunters, fictionalized version of those stories. Terry Ann Thompson's tuning in very early from Las Vegas, feeling sleep deprived because in part of the time difference and the time change as well. I'm not a fan of daylight savings time and the switches. How about you, Ralph?
Well, the New York Times editorialized yesterday in favor of it.
Yes, I was really surprised because I thought there was a movement towards it. This was not an unsigned editorial, but one of the editorial board members wrote an editorial which basically said, this is not perfect, but we should keep it.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, I'm like you. I mean, each year it turns your life upside down one way or the other. So I'm not a big fan. Plus, the difference in jurisdictions, everybody seems to have their own rules, and then you can't figure out what the time difference is in other parts of the world because it changes twice a year. So, why don't we just leave it alone?
Yeah, but that editorial was interesting. Eric's watching from Ottawa. Hello, and Ellen's watching from the Upper East Side. And great to have everybody here. Paula is linked to that New York Times editorial about daylight savings. So we want to talk about your fabulous new book. Let's hear about it. It launches tomorrow, and from the title to the topic itself, it's all unusual and very important. It's called The Believer, and it's about the weird and chilling true story of Dr. John Mack. This eminent Harvard psychiatrist and Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer risked his career to investigate the phenomenon of human encounters with aliens and to give credibility to the stupefying tales shared by people who were utterly convinced they had been abducted. And you can check out Ralph's website at ralphblumenthal.com, read more about it. It's the #1 new book of biographies and UFO books on Amazon already. And we'd love to hear Ralph talk a little bit about the book and about, you've carved out a sort of beat at the New York Times covering stories about UFOs.
Well, yes, thank you, Sri. My interest in John Mack began when I was in Texas for the New York Times, and I picked up a used copy of one of his books called Passport to the Cosmos, which was his second book and somewhat toned down from his first book, which was a bestseller called Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens. So I picked up this book, and I realized it was about a Harvard psychiatrist who got interested in investigating encounters, inexplicable encounters of ordinary people with what they described as alien beings taken onto spaceships for breeding experiments to produce a hybrid race, very strange stuff, obviously. And what intrigued me, of course, was what was a Harvard psychiatrist doing in the middle of this business. And I thought rather naively that I would give him a call and interview him how he got into this. By the way, he was a very eminent psychiatrist at Harvard. He had written a Pulitzer Prize-winning biography of Lawrence of Arabia, one of his many accomplishments. And
the head of the Department of Psychiatry.
Yeah, he was an esteemed professor. He was he had done a lot of important things at Harvard. He was extremely well regarded, a pillar of the Harvard establishment, and suddenly he was investigating aliens. So I thought this would make an interesting feature story. I prepared to give him a call at Harvard. Of course, I didn't realize how prominent he already was. I was very naive. But he was already very famous based on his books, one of which I'd read. And then a few days later, I picked up the paper to find he had been run over in England, where he had gone for a conference on T.E. Lawrence. He stepped out of the underground station and looked the wrong way down the London street, as we all do. And he got run down by a drunk driver and killed. So I was obviously shocked, as was a lot of the world who followed his investigations of aliens. And what I did next was get in touch with the family, tracked them down and said, gee, I'd like to do more reporting or a book on John Mack. And it was not a great matter of timing because they were in the middle of grieving. I was rather insensitive in the way I reached out to them. But eventually, we stayed in touch, and they gave me access finally to all his papers, archives, his private journals, which were very interesting because as a psychiatrist, he subjected himself, had to analysis, and he taped those sessions. So I had access to his analytical sessions and his private thoughts and his drafts of things he was working on. And anyway, that occupied me for the next 16 years. So, that's how I got into it. And I was fascinated by his research because it opened up the world of UFOs and, alien phenomenon to me. And I was not, it was in all the reporting I did for the Times and all my interests till then, I must say that UFOs and aliens were not among them. I read science fiction as a kid, like everybody, after the war, Ray Bradbury and Isaac Asimov, and those stories were very big. But I never thought of myself as a fan or a ufologist. But something about Mack's strange odyssey gripped me, maybe in the same way, it obsessed him. So that's what really got me started, and I'm happy to talk about what it was that he found so strange, and that gripped him, and that I found so strange, and why it is not simply a question of mental illness or delusion or fabrication in these questions. There's a much broader mystery involved, and all my reporting at the New York Times, all my hard-nosed reporting and mafia and Nazi war criminals was always based on reporting, solid reporting, and not fantasy or making stuff up or I followed very simple reporting techniques, investigative reporting techniques of verifying things. So and so did John Mack. I mean, he was no dummy. He studied the human mind. And he could not explain what these people had gone through, which is really the beginning and end of the story. We don't know to this day what explains these encounters. But one thing is for sure, on some level, they seem to have happened in some dimension of reality because there's too many different consistent accounts by too many people, including young children, 2 years old or so, who are not, recounting the books they've read or the movies they've seen. They're just very straightforward stories of a little kid who'll say, little man took me up into the sky. I fly into the sky. So for a lot of reasons, John Mack ended up thinking that he was onto something, and I think he was onto something.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. Let's greet Miriam Berkeley, who's watching from Hell's Kitchen. Ying Chan is watching from Hong Kong, and Lotte is watching from Bhutan. We've got folks all over the world. We're about to talk more about this new book by Ralph Blumenthal, who's worked at the New York Times for 45 years and covered everything from Nazi war criminals to the state of Texas and Broadway and so much more. But his new book is about a former, a late professor at Harvard, the head of the psychiatry department, who wrote a book about, who did so much research about people who had been abducted or who claimed to have been abducted. And I want to tell Ralph that I, as a child, was a big believer in UFOs. I wanted them to be so real. And I saw a TV show called Project Blue Book, which was about an Air Force investigative project into UFOs. And I was so disappointed that every episode would end with them just being weather balloons or some farmer's thing, imagination. And so I really did want to believe. And when the X-Files came, it was the same way. I wanted this to be true. I wanted us to have UFOs. And then there was a story just a few weeks ago about UFOs, and you had a chance to write about that. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, while I was working on the book, and quite independently, a writer friend of mine, Leslie Kane, came to me with a story of being at a meeting in Washington where a secret Pentagon program to investigate UFOs was under discussion. And the head of that program, a man named Luis Elizondo, told this small group of people that Leslie was part of that he was resigning as head of the secret Pentagon unit because he wasn't getting enough government support. And this was a complete revelation that the government was not out of the UFO business as it claimed after Project Blue Book in 1969, but that, thanks to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, who got $22 million devoted to this program in 2007, a secret program had been underway for some time to investigate these encounters of UFOs. But Navy pilots who were chasing these objects with incredible speed, the ability to come in and out of visibility, and sometimes operate underwater. Anyway, so we took that story to the New York Times, Leslie and I, and to our delight, editors realized right away it was a groundbreaking story. We had everybody was on the record. There were no anonymous sources. We had the documents. We had the letter of resignation. It was, checked out thoroughly, and editors, to their credit, went for the story. It appeared on the front page in December 2017 with Navy videos. You see one on the screen there of, taken with F-16 thermal imaging cameras and other devices. These objects were caught on radar. So they existed. Clearly they existed. And that was really the revelation, because until then,
what are we looking at, Ralph? Just maybe Neil will blow that up a little bit so we can see it bigger. And then
this is the image from a Navy gun camera. And it's focusing on this strange thing we call the gimbal. It looks like a spinning top, and it's turning there. And it was recorded with the voices of the Navy pilots looking at it and exclaiming how extraordinary this was. So that added to the credibility. As I was saying, the revelation was these were no longer imaginary objects or the products of, some mental fixation, but these were real. They were captured on, physical equipment. They were, in some cases, eyeballed by the most highly trained observers we have in this country. products of millions of dollars of, technological training. You can't say these pilots are crazy or they're imagining things. So we had this evidence that these things are real. Now, we don't know what they are. Nobody knows what we don't know where they come from, how they got here. Are they from, outside, the solar system? Are they interplanetary? Are they intelligent? All those are interesting questions. All we know is that these things exist. So, when people say, do you believe in UFOs? I always say that's a silly question, because you don't believe in something that you don't believe in. Do you believe in the moon? Something exists. The word unidentified is chosen. Now the Pentagon choice of terminology is UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, because they don't like the UFO label, I guess. But either way, the unidentified is key. We don't know what they are, but there is something there. So that's the reporting we did for the Times, and we followed it up with accounts from the Navy pilots. We interviewed them on the record with names, and the latest story was the most intriguing of all: whether the government and private contractors have in their possession actual materials from crashed craft from wherever they come from. And there were briefings of congressional aides to that effect, that the government, yes, there are some materials that have been retrieved and are under study.
So are you talking about Area 51 type things, or?
Well, it's a little different. Area 51 is a test site that is, mythologized. It exists, and good books on it. A lot of secret research was going on there, and the government has, in fact, been trying to reverse engineer the properties of these extraordinary objects, because it's an interplanetary race between us and our adversaries, the Russians, the Chinese, Israelis, who are not our adversaries, but Iranians, countries around high-tech countries around the world are all interested in this technology for defense, for economic exploitation. If anybody could harness this amazing technology, this ability to fly at hypersonic speeds, to cloak their existence, disappear, to operate underwater, it would be a tremendous boon. So there is a great worldwide competition, and some of that research we think is going on at Area 51.
So some of the skepticism about all of this, of course, that it seems like they always come to America. The aliens come to America and are kidnapping Americans, is one of the jokes that's made about this. Our friend Terry Thompson's watching from Las Vegas, Nevada, is popular for this. So can you address that part of this, please?
Absolutely. I want to be clear that nothing we've written in the Times deals with aliens, because we're not ready to report that. We don't have the backup for that. That's an entirely different area of study, and that's why I wrote a book about it, and John Mack research. But that has not been a factor in the Times stories we've written. It's very important not to confuse the two. We've written about UFOs, which again are unidentified. We're not saying they're run by aliens. We're not saying they've come from other worlds, or even that they're necessarily extraterrestrial. They're just unidentified objects that have amazing properties and that we now know have a physical existence, which is quite something to acknowledge. But no one, we're not writing in the New York Times about aliens. But I must say that in my research, Sri, I'm very disappointed in the reaction of so-called skeptics who have been, knocking down these stories and ridiculing these stories for so long without really doing the research. I've done a tremendous amount of research for my book. There was actually a conference at MIT I talk about in 1992, where experts from across the spectrum, physicists, atomic physicists, psychiatrists, theologians, folklorists, all gathered to look at this phenomenon from every different point of view to try to figure out, and I'm talking here about alien encounters, to try to figure out what it amounted to, because it was so mysterious and so tantalizing. And they didn't come up with the answer either, but at least they shed some light on what it wasn't, namely, mental illness and delusion and all these other things. So it seems to me, if you're going to, get into this field and you're going to be a debunker, so-called, and you're going to ridicule and make fun and smirk at these people who are doing this research, at least do the research yourself and know what has come out, because a tremendous amount of material is available, accounts by people who've had these encounters, and books by scientists and experts like John Mack, a medical professional. So there is a lot really to study and understand. The answers haven't come, but at least we know what the questions are.
I like that you're making a distinction between UFOs and aliens, and you're saying that there is proof of UFOs, but not yet of aliens. And I think that's something that people might have trouble understanding. One other point, because we live in a time of so many documentaries and conspiracy theories and all of that, there's a lot of ancient alien movies and films and things that you see. And there's been some recent critiques of that industry saying that whenever there are people when other civilizations apart from the West, when in other parts of the world, when they have created something, the answer from white people is to say, oh, that's aliens must have done it, because these people couldn't have done it. Our technology is superior. So that was something new that I have been reading about. Janine says, what is the reason to keep this issue secret instead of having just having it as an area of research and exploration like others? Is it just about competitive commercialization by government?
Yes. Some of it is, legitimate government interest in making sure that any research we do remains, for the benefit of the American people who pay for it, and not given to adversaries who might use it against us. So that's a legitimate concern. But there's a more deep-seated factor at work here. Ever since the beginning of the UFO era, which is generally dated to 1947, when a pilot named Kenneth Arnold saw UFOs over Mount Rainier. And the same year, there was this unexplained crash of something at Roswell. And we could talk about that, but it was something that crashed. So 1947 might have been that year. The government has been very reluctant to share what it knows about these incidents. And apparently it has to do with fear that the American people can't handle this information, or it would be too upsetting to acknowledge, for the government to acknowledge what people who experienced these things knew, that there was something very strange going on. So the government has a long and I think sad or even sordid history of obfuscating or even using disinformation to throw people off the track. And there have many books been written about this and research about false information that was given out. Actually, in our reporting, Leslie and I came across some documents that were very intriguing, but that we concluded from talking to a lot of knowledgeable people that they were half true and half faked. That there was false information written into the documents for whatever reason, either to throw adversaries off the trail or, to complicate matters, whatever, that the documents were not all true, but they were true enough as far as they went, but then false information was written into them by somebody. So that's part of the problem. It's a world of mirrors. There was a writer named Charles Ford, a great anomalist writer, who said, this whole field is like looking for a needle that never was looking for a needle that was never lost in a haystack that never was. I think that's a good metaphor.
Think about this. Let's see who else is watching. Here's Paulo's watching from Montclair. Eve says, good morning. And Apollo says, wow, aliens and UFOs, exciting. Conspiracy theories used to be fun until QAnon became mainstream. Do you worry that the more attention you give to this, that some of the crazy people will use this in bad ways?
Well, it's a concern. It's true that it feeds into, there's a very vibrant community out there, especially now with social media, that follows, news of aliens, and the stuff is, goes from solid, scientific research like John Mack did to a large extent, to really wild, unproven stuff, speculations. And it does feed into, people who adopt all kinds of crazy conspiracies. There's no way to prevent that. When we were doing our reporting, Leslie Kane and I, we encountered a lot of people coming onto us from the internet, throwing, basically kicking sand in our face, putting us on false trails, trying to expose what reporting we were doing before we had nailed it down. So it is the Wild West. And there's a danger that all this stuff can be misused. But that's why we try to be so meticulous in only reporting. People ask us, well, when's your next story coming out? I say, well, when we have it ready. It really requires a lot of research and on the record stuff. We don't take stuff, on background and without attribution. So to answer your question, it is a danger.
All right. Naomi says she just purchased The Last Days of the Sicilians for my upcoming anniversary gift to my pizza and mafia loving husband. And that's about one of Ralph's other books. And Janine says, thank you. Can't wait to read your book. And Kalpana is watching from Singapore. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We have about 45 minutes left with Ralph Blumenthal, who's been at the New York Times for 45 years as a reporter, still occasionally contributes to the New York Times. He's got a big book out that's coming out tomorrow called The Believer, a biography of John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist who put his career on the line by talking about abductions and investigating them. So, Ralph, let's take a look at the newspaper and talk about the Sunday New York Times. And you saw me do a little tour of the paper before. I'd love to get your thoughts on what on some of these stories and how they're being covered. And please feel free to comment on anything you see here, anything that catches your eye. You, of course, were there when there were no ads on the front page, when there was no color on the front page. Can you talk a little bit about design and layout?
Yes. I mean, I got up early to look at the paper because I always do. And the first thing I do is I try to see the differences between the day-old paper that I pick up off my, doorstep and the web version that I've already been looking at. So often I don't have to read the stories in the paper because I've already read them online, which we certainly didn't have in the days when I started in journalism. But I'll tell you, Sri, the one of the stories that caught my eye, obviously, was actually in the layout of the front page. I was relieved to see a single column lead, not a double column, not a banner scare headline as we had so often in recent years, but a simple single column story that shows that the world is still holding together and it's not, the end of the world. So it's comforting to see a sober front page without a scare headline. But that said, the lead story about poverty is very interesting because it's written by one of the true experts that the Times has, Jason DeParle, on poverty. He's an old timer like me. He's been around a long time, and he knows the world of poverty, anti-poverty efforts. And one of the marks of a great paper, if I can put in a plug for my alma mater here, is that the Times has so many people who are experts in their fields. And when they write about a subject, it's a beat that they've had and they know well. So it is an interesting story that when at a time, when people were thinking, well, we can cut back the federal commitment now to anti-poverty, and we've come so far. And he's saying, no, we now have, you know, a $2 trillion stimulus package, and the country's taking a new look at the need for anti-poverty efforts. So that story struck me. I'll shift, just because it's on my mind, to another story that caught my attention, the Metro story, the Metro section, metropolitan section, about the investigation at Cornell into the hazing death of that freshman, was a chilling story, absolutely chilling story about still no answers is right. I mean, these parents are trying to figure out how their son was, you know, plied with liquor and was found dead falling off a ravine at Cornell. And the police just didn't do the proper investigation. It's clear from the article. Shocking article, and very well done, I might say, and maybe a bit of a stretch for the so-called, you know, metropolitan section, but it is the metropolitan area, and more investigative reporting like that is something I always welcome, because I loved investigative reporting when I was there, and I think there needs to be more of it. I mean, we have talented reporters, lots of things that need to be investigated. And whenever a story like that appears, I think it gives some comfort to the family and shows the powers that be they can't get away with obfuscating. And I think the role of the Cornell administration really bears some looking at here. So, you know, I made some notes. I was also interested in the.
I'll just say 1 second that this was October 2019 when he died. So
yes,
plenty of time has passed, and
yeah, there was time.
There should be more answers at this point.
And you know, it is always good when a Times reporter jumps in and starts asking questions, because it you know, it sheds light on a dark corner. I mean, this, you know, as I said, it's nice. You don't have to read it all, but it's nice to know it's all there. There's so much in the paper. There was a story inside, you know, buried kind of inside the main section, about a 9,000-year-old city in Turkey that had a high level of civilization that I never heard of. But it turns out that they apparently had you know, some important role for women in the society, and they found you know, bones of a woman and her jewelry, which showed her a great position in society. But a striking story.
Is this the one? Is this the one? Bronze Age? Tomb?
Yeah, Bronze Age.
Yeah.
9,000.
Yeah, in Spain. Right?
In Spain, excuse me. What I said, Turkey, Spain. But a striking story. The other thing, you know, and as I said, it's such a joy to go through the paper, all the sections, because you keep finding stuff that's interesting. One of the first things I look at every Sunday is the opinion section. It used to be, you know, News of the Week in Review, you know, for many years. Now it's the so-called opinion section, and this one takes a departure, because it's all a compilation of reminiscences of the what I call the year of living dangerously, I guess, the year we went through, and how different people coped with it. And you know, on the one hand, you can say, God, you know, more on the, you know, these recollections of you know, the traumas we went through, and yet it's beautifully done with nice photographs and fresh you know, recollections of how we all suffered through this year. But and interestingly, no editorials in this issue, and no op-ed. So I think that's interesting. They're always reinventing themselves. So I thought that was striking. And then
I just want to point out this particular story here. It says, we did not suffer equally. One of the, I believe one of the problems of the way journalists cover big crises like the Texas snowstorm or the pandemic is that it's an equalizer, when in fact it's not. It makes things worse. So people, the have-nots have even less during the pandemic, whereas the haves somehow muddle through if needed. And this is the point that they're making in this piece by Yarina Serkez, who is a graphics editor in the opinion section.
Yeah, I mean, one thing the COVID pandemic did highlight was the equality in our country. I mean, it really between that and the the Black Lives Matter protests of the the George Floyd murder, and it's really shown a stark spotlight on our society. So maybe that's one of the only bright lights of the year we've been through, is that it's made us look at ourselves a little more critically. Another thing that jumped out at me from today's papers on A2, Sarah Lyle's story about the Phantom Newsroom. The Times has been closed, as we all know, and the amazing thing to me is this whole paper is being put out remotely by people in their homes, interacting, online. I mean, that's unfathomable to me. Where I grew up, we were putting the paper together by, constant meetings and interactions, and people huddled over desks and computers and fixing things and editing. The fact that it's now just flying through cyberspace and nobody's physically interacting with anybody is extraordinary that they can even do it. And I think that people who are not journalists or who don't know how the paper used to be put out might miss that part of what's going on. But that is an extraordinary story, that it can even be done, and not just by the Times, but the Washington Post, Journal, all the papers are putting this news together remotely.
Yeah, and she ends this by saying, the last part of this, she says, "I've spent too much time inside my own head. I miss making lunch dates in the cafeteria. I miss the buoyancy that comes when you work side by side with people you love and respect. I miss the office. I hope we'll all be back there soon." Do you think that some folks would even at the Times prefer to work from home and have that flexibility?
Yeah, I think, reporters, given a choice, would rather be home, than in the office. In that sense, I mean, people who commuted from, through traffic or so. But, look, we're social beings. We love the romance of journalism and the newsroom. I mean, that picture can make you cry. The empty.
And this is the New York Times. We should just say that this is a video about the Times office during the pandemic, and that's what we're watching here.
Really, it's so sad, because so much of our lives was spent together. Yeah, it brings back a lot of memories. God, frozen in time.
Yeah, it looks like after when time stands still because of a bombing or something.
Yeah, it's like a plutonium bomb or whatever just killed all the people and left the building, the structures intact.
And it still feels that way.
Let's listen to a little bit of this. I don't know if there's narration, but there's some music we can hear. Look at this is the dining area, right?
Yeah, the cafeteria. I can see the table I sat at.
The Times office covers several floors of a building stretching from 40th to 41st Street on 8th Avenue near Times Square. With its ergonomic desks, its see-through walled meeting rooms, its whiteboards scribbled with strange notations, it has a bustle to it, full of smart, wise, irreverent, spiky, friendly, difficult, brilliant people, all working together. I miss spying the editors in the daily news meetings. I miss the unexpected conversations. I miss the little fish in his little fishbowl who used to live in one of the meeting rooms on the 3rd floor. I miss the chatter, serendipity, the energy, the sense of purpose, the feeling in the air, the buoyancy that comes when you're with other people and can get out of your own head.
That's the atrium where they have garden. Time lapse of that. Wow.
If I think hard, I can imagine this building the way it should be, filled with people again. And I really can't wait to get back there.
Really nicely done. Ralph, while we're speaking of the New York Times building, we should say that we have a photograph from the 15th floor where they have a kind of New York Times museum. And we have a photograph that we can show you, and we'd like you to discuss that with us. Tell us what we're looking at, Ralph.
Yeah, this is great. This is David Dunlap, a Times reporter who is very attuned to Times history, put together a Times museum on the 15th floor. So far, it's only for guests who come to the New York Times and staff, but it enshrines some of the memorabilia that we reporters have collected over the years. So before the pandemic, I donated some stuff I'd collected as a foreign correspondent in South Vietnam and West Germany, pictures of me with Vietnamese soldiers, a guidebook to the streets of Saigon, a postcard I sent to a colleague from showing a war scene in Vietnam. So it is a wonderful way to preserve our history. I hope that someday they'll find a way to get school classes and others to come in, because Times has an incredible history. And a lot of it is in these artifacts that are fun to look at. The old machinery we used to use, and just the culture of the New York Times, which is a wonderful story. So you can't see it on the picture, but on the right side, I think there's some stuff that I donated. I remember Vietnamese gave me a hairpin and a little sculpture made out of metal from a shot down American plane, or so they told me. And I brought that back from Vietnam, and I put it in the museum. It's kind of a shocking artifact, but I thought it deserved some kind of display. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, folks. That's Ralph Blumenthal. Wait, let's look at some more pictures of Ralph. Tell us what the heck is going on here.
Well, I like to say that this pen is much mightier than the sword. I was in an antique store. I stopped there once, and I had to photograph myself with this pen. You guys did a lot of good research.
Yeah, we should also show that first photograph we showed of the collection of transcripts. Incredible. And look, Ralph looks the same. The color of the hair has changed, but otherwise he looks the same after all of these years.
It's funny story, Sri. I got to tell you this, that those transcripts I used to pick up from the U.S. attorney, who was then Rudy Giuliani. And on Fridays at the end of the work week, at the end of the trial week, I would stop by his office and I would pick up a whole bunch of not these many, but a portion of them, to take home for the weekend and study transcripts of the Pizza Connection trial. And then Monday morning, I'd bring them back to his office down at Federal Plaza, because they'd need them for the trial going forward. And I guess when it was over, they let me have a whole bunch of them. So I took this picture. But Giuliani was a big hero in that case. And he was the one who put, a lot of mafia bosses in jail. And he headed the prosecution in that case, which was a landmark case. So whenever I see these transcripts, I think I got them from Rudy Giuliani, who was Rudy Giuliani then, not Rudy Giuliani now.
Yeah, from hero to zero is one way to look at it. Folks, this is Ralph Blumenthal. He is a former New York Times reporter for 45 years and the author of a new book called The Believer. about John Mack. The subtitle is Alien Encounters, Hard Science, and the Passion of John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist who died in 2004. This is the Sunday New York Times Read Along. We do this every Sunday. So please join us at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And we have a great guest also for next week that we'd like to make sure you know about. So we are very excited. As you can see, Ralph is our guest today. Next week is Jason Dearn, who is an award-winning investigative journalist for the AP and author of Kill Shot, A Shadow Industry, A Deadly Disease. And then Amy Reinhart will be with us, Deputy Director of First Draft, a former New York Times, Wall Street Journal reporter. So a great lineup of guests as always. So please do tune in every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. We have about 20 minutes left with Ralph Blumenthal. I'm going to switch over now to the obits in the New York Times. And I also want, it'll be a good excuse for me to ask Ralph about one of the biggest obits he got to write about Burt Reynolds, the obit of Burt Reynolds.
Yeah, thank you. The way the obits work is any Times reporter can volunteer or be tapped if he or she is interested in writing an advance obit, because some people are so important that they don't want to wait until the person dies. And by the way, there's a wonderful documentary on this called Obit, which talks about the obituary factory at the New York Times and some of the mainstays like Bruce Weber, who were part of the regular obituary staff. Anyway, the Times came to me some years ago when Burt Reynolds was not doing well and said, we better hustle up an obit quickly. So the process really involves going, in those days, and maybe still today, going to the old morgue, which was the newspaper clipping files of the New York Times, and they're still maintained, surprisingly enough, even though so much is online. But we still have old folders of clippings, material that's not necessarily easily retrievable online. So I went through these folders, folder by folder, recording his movies, his earlier movies, the big famous ones, Smokey and the Bandit, Deliverance, of course, and I wrote the obit. Now, of course, he rallied after that, which I'm happy about for his sake, for all our sake as moviegoers. So he didn't die. And he lived for quite a few years, maybe 6-7 years after that. And then, unfortunately, he passed away, and the obit ran. But it was a wonderful chance to talk about his career. He was actually the #1 box office attraction in his time, which kind of surprised me. But not really. If you see his movies, he had that quality of coolness that was just, connected with audiences. He was so sexy and so, charismatic, and his love affair with Sally Field. I mean, it was just a lot to talk about. So it was really fun to do. And it's sad to say goodbye to a star like that, because you feel you know him, or her. But on the other hand, you try to do the best you can for the proper send-off.
Ralph, I'd love for you to read that opening paragraph out loud if you can see it there.
Burt Reynolds, the wryly appealing Hollywood heartthrob who carried on a long love affair with moviegoers, even though his performances were often more memorable than the films that entertained them, died on Thursday in Jupiter, Florida. He was 82.
Wow.
I actually quoted him in the pieces, I remember, admitting that some of his movies were dogs. He was pretty honest that way. A self-mocking charmer, I said, yeah. There he is.
You called it a turbulent career.
Yeah.
And Apollo, who's watching, says Burt Reynolds was hot. Yeah.
I mean, Deliverance is an amazing movie, and chilling. It's almost unwatchable. It is so unbearably violent and tense. I think, there's the quote. I think I'm the only movie star who's a movie star in spite of his pictures, and not because of them. I've had some real turkeys. Unfortunately, I didn't talk to Burt for this obituary, which is common, by the way. It's all taken from the clips. I mean, sometimes we get the chance to interview somebody while they're alive and say, hey, we're updating our files. I'd like to interview you. And they say, wait a minute, is this for my obituary? And then you say, well, yeah, actually, you're so important that we can't wait till you die. We have to, start working on this right away. So they basically understand that, and maybe they're flattered. But I did not talk to him before, to my regret.
John Moss says, great to see your face and hear your voice, Ralph. A lot of people who've been reading you for decades will feel the same way. I'm just going to read some of the comments here since we talked about aliens and UFOs. Jonathan says, my mother claimed that my father and she saw a UFO, but didn't talk about it since they thought people would think they were crazy. So can you just touch upon that part of the John Mack legacy? The Harvard Medical School investigated him secretly because of this particular aspect of it, isn't it?
Right. Well, John Mack quickly realized that these people were not looking for attention, the people who were reporting these strange encounters with alien beings. On the contrary, they were often ashamed, and they contacted him, John Mack, through pseudonyms or mail drops because they were so ashamed of what they didn't have to be ashamed about, but they really thought they were going crazy. But the one thing I fault John Mack for, and I discuss this in the book, is he was very enthusiastic. That was his whole style. He went from one enthusiasm to the other, and he ended up, enthusiastic about investigating alien abduction. And it gave the impression that he was not keeping proper professional distance from his, whether they were patients or clients was never quite clear, but the people who came to him for help. So Harvard picked up on this early on. He'd been on the Oprah show, and he, published a best-selling book on abduction, which academician colleagues could never forgive him for. My God, a bestseller, he'd won a Pulitzer Prize for his Lawrence of Arabia biography, so they didn't forgive him for that. So there was some professional jealousy, I'm sure. But anyway, they did not like the fact that he was so shameless and enthusiastic about his research. He wasn't secret. He wasn't holding back. He went on shows, writing about it. So they convened a secret, I call it an inquisition, which was a word that they used at one point, to investigate his methods, his finances. Was he billing insurance companies improperly? In the end, he was basically exonerated. He was subject to no discipline. They just said to him, John, please don't be so enthusiastic. And he basically agreed. He said, I was over enthusiastic. But he was not, they found no fault with his methodology, etc. But it cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. And by the way, he had a wonderful defense team, including Eric McLeish, who exposed the priest abuse scandal in Boston, and he's in the movie Spotlight, and Danny Sheehan, who investigated Karen Silkwood and won a large settlement for the Karen Silkwood family after she died mysteriously of plutonium. She'd worked at a plutonium plant in Oklahoma. So he had a wonderful defense team. And it makes a good story in the book about how this, back and forth with Harvard proceeded. And by the way, Harvard never issued a report on the investigation, which was secret. I had to sort of piece this together from his, from emails and his lawyers' memoranda, et cetera.
So folks, please check out his new book. It's called The Believer. And I just want to read a couple of comments about obituaries. Ron says, advanced obit, wow. And Kalpana says, it seems rude to tell people they may die someday. And Sandra wonders, does anyone ever say no to a New York Times interview for an obit? I wonder who has.
I don't know. I can't come up with a name right now. But yeah, there are people who take it amiss. I remember vaguely being shut down by some people who did not want. They think it's bad luck. Actually, it's the opposite. We say at the New York Times, there's some law that if you, not law, L-O-R-E, that if you interview somebody for an advanced obit, it guarantees them at least 10 years more. So they don't die. On the contrary, they live longer, if only to frustrate your interest in getting the story into the paper.
It's like the opposite of the cover jinx of Sports Illustrated. That'd be one way to look at it. We only have a few minutes left. We're just going to quickly look at the New York Times Magazine. It's the music issue in the magazine, and what happens when this music issue comes out, and with the Grammys coming out tonight, is that I know so few of the artists that they write about here. But the magazine is very special, and I'm a big fan of the magazine. What about you, Ralph?
You know, I'm struck by the innovative graphics that they use. They're really very cutting edge, sometimes to the point where you can't read the headline. But the artistic, there you go, look at that. The artistic elements that go into the display is really quite extraordinary, and they seem to be trying to outdo themselves each time. Now, like you, Sri, I don't consider myself knowledgeable enough on the music scene to read this issue with any great insights. And as I said before, it's kind of a characteristic of the New York Times that you can pay attention to the parts that that really feed into your own interests, and the parts that you feel are not your thing. And I'm not a contemporary music expert. Taylor Swift I know, Beyonce I know, but you don't have to read the whole thing. But I mean, it is fun looking at those pictures. My God, they did a great job on the graphics.
Yeah, I typically like to show this to my kids who are 17 and ask them to tell me who I should know about of folks like this, because it's sort of in the same boat as you are with some of these artists. But you're right, so interesting to look at how this is all put together. Let's talk about the book review for a second. And the cover is How Beautiful We Were by Imbolo Mbue, and reviewed by Omar El Akkad. And how do you read the book review?
With great interest. It's the first thing I turn to, frankly, Sundays, because I get it Saturdays. But first of all, as an author, you want to see what other people are doing. I read the author, what's on your bedside bookshelf. I read that. And I'm surprised, actually, in this issue that the prominent books that are inside, Betsy Colbert's book on climate change is inside. I thought that was striking. You
thought it would be on the cover? Is that what you mean?
It might be on the cover, right? And what else I see here? Oh, you know what? You asked me about the book review. I got to tell you my pet peeve with the book review. When I find a book review that is more about the reviewer, his or her experience, and doesn't get to the book till way down, or is kind of impenetrable when you're looking for the simple question, is this a good book? Should I buy it? That does annoy me. And I think that the editors give the reviewers a great leeway, which is probably good. They don't censor them, so they don't all sound the same. But some of the reviews, I think, need a good editor to focus them or refocus them on the book that's being reviewed. So I read the book reviews. Some reviews I say, wow, this is great. I love this review. Others I say, what? I can't figure out what it's about and whether they like the book or not.
Sure. Here's a section, a roundup of audiobooks by Sebastian Modak. He was the 2019 Places to Go columnist for the New York Times, and Neil got to go to Amy Vershup's house. Amy is the travel editor of the New York Times, and he and Sebastian and Amy talked about the 2020 places you will go. Of course, that's the year where everything shut down, so that was too bad. Here's a book reviewed by Nina Burley, who has a big new book herself coming out about the pandemic. It's called The Good Girls, An Ordinary Killing by Sonia Falero. It's about a book about India's rape culture, which is a big problem there.
Is that about the two little girls who were?
There's a pandemic of rape issues in India, and so that she's looking at that. And here's a review of Charles Blow's book, The Devil You Know, Black Power Manifesto. He was our guest for the start of Black History Month, and it was just great to have him in your seat, Ralph, just a few weeks ago.
Right.
And let's see. I always like looking at the bestseller list. Often I haven't read any of the books on the top list, but here is We'll just quickly look at the top 5 in both sections. The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. If you've read any of these, please tell us. Firefly Lane by Kristen Hanna. So 2 books by the same person at number 1 and number 2. And I'm sorry to say I don't know Kristen Hanna. The Kaiser's Web by Steve Berry. A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah Maas. And The Duke and I is the basis of the Netflix series Bridgerton by Julia Quinn. And on the nonfiction side, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster by Bill Gates. Think Again by Adam Grant. Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, who might run or is seriously considering a run for governor of Texas. Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, which my daughter is reading. And Walk in My Combat Boots by James Patterson. So those are the top-selling books in the U.S. this week.
So you always look and see how many books on the bestseller list were written by celebrities.
Yes.
It's very dispiriting for non-celebrities. It's tough competing with the Obamas and, the James Pattersons, but okay, good luck to them.
Go Yankees.
Yeah, this is for Neil that I'm showing this, the story of the Yankees from 1903 to the present, 390 articles, profiles, and essays. Alec Baldwin has written the introduction. Yankee history is rich and deep, with players so iconic their first or last name or their nickname is identification enough. So unusual book there. So as we wrap up here, Ralph, tell us your tips for young folks who are in journalism, thinking of going into journalism. What is your assessment of the field now?
It's the best time ever. I mean, thanks to the recent, late administration, there's been a tremendous boom in investigative journalism. The whole profession has had a spotlight shown on it, positively, in my view, not negatively. I think when I teach journalism courses or classes, I tell the students it's the best time ever to be a journalist. There's so much going on, plus the different platforms, the social media, and we never had that ability in my time to correct stories and change them and update them instantly. I mean, it puts a tremendous burden on journalists, but on the other hand, everybody's a journalist today, so you're competing with people who have no credentials and may not be telling the truth. But it is a wonderful profession. It's a wonderful time to go into it. There's so much to do. One of the things I teach in the courses I teach on fake news is that you look for a paper that that employs experts. That's one of the marks of credibility of a publication. And the Times has so many experts. I referred again to Jason DePaul, who wrote the lead piece on anti-poverty. He really knows the anti-poverty field. His wife was a famous advisor to the administration in Washington. He himself has written extensively about poverty. So you're getting, an expert's view, and people who cover, Washington are, trained observers of the White House or Congress, Carl Hulse in Congress. So I think the Times gives young reporters something to shoot for in terms of, the becoming an expert in a field. Betsy Colbert, of course, with her climate change. So I think it's a wonderful profession, and I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity for so many years at the Times. Again, it's like a cliche, but I never worked for a living. I just went in, had fun, and they paid me. Maybe not enough, but it was enough for me.
All right. We're almost at the end of our hour and a half, incredible hour and a half with Ralph Blumenthal, who spent 45 years at the New York Times, foreign correspondent, Southwest correspondent, investigative reporter, wrote about the arts and culture world, and so much more. Let's give one more plug to your book and tell folks why they should get this book, no matter what their interests might be.
Well, I found John Mack a kind of a flawed character. One point I didn't make in the discussion is he lost his mother when he was 8.5 months old. She died of an infection. The penicillin wasn't in general use yet. It had just been invented. So he spent his whole life sort of searching for this lost mother. And I think that became a factor in his search for all kinds of ineffable things in the universe. And it started off with social causes. He He searched for peace in the Middle East. He met with Yasser Arafat. He searched for different stages of consciousness. He started, went through breathing disciplines, and little by little, he gravitated to aliens and what was going on with these strange encounters. But it was always a process of searching for something that was missing in his life and missing in his knowledge base. So I think that was a big part of it. And in the end, he went full circle. He was investigating life after death. And even as he was run down and killed, there was some thought that this was the ultimate end of his research. He could investigate his own death. So it was really grounded in his biography, his search for the strange search for alien intelligence.
Before you go, I was just looking behind you at your wonderful backdrop. Can you tell us about that photograph, the black and white photograph we see there?
Yeah, that's a picture of Franklin Roosevelt and Al Smith, taken in 1931, I believe, when Roosevelt was still governor, and he was visiting Al Smith, his predecessor. I found it in an antique store, and I always loved it because Roosevelt already had polio, but he was standing up and he was gripping something to help him stand. And he was going, there's a boat behind him. He visited Al Smith at some marina. But Roosevelt's a big hero of mine. I have a couple of pictures of him around the house. And actually a collection, I'm a distinguished lecturer at Baruch College. And one of the collections we have there that I'm in charge of is the Institute of Public Administration and its leader, Luther Gulick, who worked with Roosevelt a lot, both as governor and as president. So I'm a great Roosevelt fan.
Great to hear that. And Apollo says it's an amazing show, Sri and Digimentors. Thank you. Naomi says excellent show, informative and entertaining. Thanks so much for showcasing Ralph and his remarkable career. Everyone, please tag a friend who would enjoy watching this. They can watch this on record in about 2 minutes. It'll restart again, and they can catch the entire episode. And we're live every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, looking at the New York Times and reading it out loud, sort of like crazy people. We've been doing it for 5+ years now, and we're so grateful to our guests like Ralph who have joined us. So thank you very much, Ralph. We'll let you go, and Neil will say goodbye and wrap up the show for us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Check out ralphblumenthal.com and at ralphblue, B-L-U. Neil, awesome job as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sri. And of course, we couldn't do it without this incredible team behind the scenes: Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranauckas. Really have to thank them for engaging with the audience, sharing links, responding to questions as we go. We also want to acknowledge Carla Baranauckas puts out the Local Connection newsletter. It's a great resource for folks. The Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University brings you the Local Connection newsletter every week. It offers story ideas and pro tips for journalists. Best of all, it's free. You can subscribe by going to bit.ly/localnewstips, bit.ly/localnewstips. And as Sri mentioned earlier, we'll just remind people that our upcoming guests, of course, Ralph was our guest today, but next week, Jason Deeren will be our guest. He's the award-winning investigative journalist for the Associated Press and author of Kill Shot, A Shadow Industry, A Deadly Disease. And Amy Reinhart will be joining us March 28th. She's the deputy director of First Draft and a former reporter with the New York Times, Wall Street Journal. She was also with the Overseas Press Club of America. A quick shout out. I want to thank Amy for joining us today and watching. She said earlier, as I scroll up, looking forward to joining us on the 28th. So Amy, thank you very much. We'll be in touch to prep the show and look forward to getting to know you. Of course, after this show is over, Sri has some work to do. He's going to be hosting, executive producing She's on Call with our host, Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Kurian. Shri, can you tell us a little bit about this week's show?
Yeah, so they every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern, please go to She's on Call on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And the topic is pediatric heart and adult vascular health. Two terrific guests will be joining us. So please tune in at 11 a.m. Eastern time every Sunday. After this show, we take a little break and then we're back. And our friend Stefan Kaplan has a great show coming up on Thursday as part of his Spin It Social Hour. That's 9 p.m. Eastern time. He's going to be interviewing Ranita Roy, who's a very famous photographer and based in Calcutta in India. So please check his work out at Spin It Social.
Absolutely. Again, thank you very much, Shri. And a couple of comments from Lotte. Thank you and have a great weekend. Stefan is thanking Ralph for being here. So we want to thank Stefan for watching, of course. Ron Thomas, another great show, and the A-team, referring to our staff. Again, our team is incredible. We would love to work with you on a project. Our firm is Digimentors, that Shri is the co-founder of. We do social and digital consulting. We can help you with online conferences, summits, webinars, talk shows like this one. We can also do trainings and workshops. Please feel free to get in touch with either Shri or myself. You can reach us at neil@digimentors.group or shri@digimentors.group. You can also follow us on Twitter at Neil Parekh, and Shri is at Shri. With that, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.